There are people who move through the world as if they were made of glass. Not fragile exactly, but transparent, permeable. They feel the weight of every unspoken word, every shift in energy, every disappointment that crosses another person's face, and somewhere along the way they learn to make themselves smaller, quieter, easier to be around. They learn to carry other people's comfort on their shoulders, like it was their sacred duty, until one day they stop. This is not a story about rebellion. It's not about anger or revenge or suddenly becoming selfish. It's something far more mysterious, far more unsettling. It's about what happens when someone who has spent their entire life attuning themselves to others finally turns that same attention inward. When they realize that the person they've been neglecting, abandoning, betraying over and over again is themselves, and the world doesn't know what to do with them anymore. There's a particular kind of sensitivity that runs deeper than emotion. It's not about crying easily, or being moved by music or sunsets, though those things might be true too. It's about perceiving the texture of existence itself, the unspoken agreements, the silent contracts people make without ever saying a word, the way a room shifts when someone is pretending to be happy, the way a smile can carry the weight of years of resignation. Sensitive souls don't just feel their own lives, they feel the edges of everyone else's. And this feeling, this constant awareness of the inner worlds of others, becomes both a gift and a curse. Because when you can sense what people need, when you can feel their disappointments before they even speak them, when you know exactly what to say to make them comfortable, it becomes almost automatic to provide it, to smooth over the rough edges, to soften yourself so that others don't have to feel any friction. This is how people-pleasing is born, not from weakness, but from a profound, almost supernatural awareness of others. It starts innocently enough. A child who can read their parents' mood and adjusts accordingly. A teenager who becomes the peacekeeper, the one who makes everyone laugh when tension rises. An adult who says yes when they mean no, because they've already felt the disappointment that no would cause, and they can't bear to be the source of it. But here's what nobody tells you about living this way. Here's what the sensitive soul discovers only after years, sometimes decades, of bending and adjusting and accommodating. You don't just lose yourself in small ways, you lose the very ground you stand on. You become a shapeshifter, a mirror, a room that rearranges its furniture depending on who walks in. And one day you look around and realize you can't remember what the room looked like when it was just yours. You've become a stranger to yourself. The philosopher Martin Heidegger spoke of something he called das Man, the they-self, the version of ourselves that lives according to what one does rather than what we authentically are. We become absorbed into the anonymous crowd, into the expectations and norms and unspoken rules of social existence. We live, but we live as someone else would live. We choose, but we choose what one should choose. We speak, but we speak in the language of collective comfort, rather than individual truth. For the sensitive soul who has spent years people-pleasing, this absorption into das Man is almost total. They've become so skilled at reading what others expect that they've forgotten to ask what they themselves desire. Their entire existence has been organized around a single exhausting question: what does everyone else need from me right now? And then something breaks. Maybe it's a betrayal. Maybe it's exhaustion. Maybe it's simply the accumulation of years of self-abandonment finally reaching a critical mass. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a quiet moment alone when they catch a glimpse of who they might have been if they hadn't spent so much energy trying to be what others needed. Whatever the catalyst, something shifts, and the sensitive soul makes a decision that feels both terrifying and inevitable. They decide to stop. Not to stop caring, not to stop feeling, but to stop contorting themselves into shapes that don't fit, to stop saying yes when everything inside them is screaming no, to stop managing other people's emotions as if they were responsible for them, to stop diminishing their own truth to make room for everyone else's comfort. This is where the real story begins. When a sensitive soul stops people-pleasing, the first thing they encounter is not freedom, it's guilt. A guilt so profound, so visceral, that it feels like they're committing a moral crime. Every time they set a boundary, they feel the weight of the disappointment they're causing. Every time they speak their truth, they sense the discomfort it creates. And because they're still deeply sensitive, because they still feel everything, this guilt is almost unbearable. They hear the voices, "You've changed. You're not the person I thought you were. You used to be so easygoing, so accommodating." And these voices burrow deep because the sensitive soul knows they're true. They have changed. They're no longer willing to erase themselves for the sake of someone else's ease. But here's what's happening beneath the surface. In that invisible realm where transformation occurs, the sensitive soul is learning to distinguish between empathy and self-erasure. They're learning that feeling someone's disappointment doesn't mean they're responsible for fixing it. That sensing someone's discomfort doesn't obligate them to absorb it or prevent it. This is one of the most difficult lessons a sensitive person will ever learn, because their entire identity has been built on the idea that their sensitivity is a gift they must constantly give away. That awareness of others is meaningless unless it's translated into service. That feeling deeply is only valuable if it makes someone else's life easier. But what if sensitivity was never meant to be a tool for self-sacrifice? What if it was meant to be a way of being present to life, including your own? There's a moment in this journey that few talk about, a moment so subtle you might miss it if you're not paying attention. It's the moment when the sensitive soul realizes that their people-pleasing wasn't just about making others comfortable. It was about control, about managing outcomes, about ensuring that they would never have to face the unbearable possibility of being rejected for who they truly are. If you're always giving people what they want, always anticipating their needs, always smoothing over the rough edges, then you never have to risk being seen. You never have to offer your authentic self and watch someone turn away from it. You never have to face the terror of being chosen or not chosen based on your actual essence rather than your performance. This realization lands like a betrayal, because the sensitive soul believed their people-pleasing was selfless, was generous, was loving, and in some ways it was, but it was also the most sophisticated form of self-protection they could devise, a way to be close to people without ever really being vulnerable, a way to be needed without ever revealing what they themselves need. When this truth surfaces, it brings with it a new layer of grief. Not just grief for the years lost, but grief for the purity of the story they'd been telling themselves. They weren't just the generous one, the giving one, the one who loved too much. They were also the scared one, the one who couldn't bear to be ordinary, the one who believed that if they stopped performing, stopped being useful, stopped making themselves indispensable, they would be left completely alone. And maybe that fear wasn't unfounded. Maybe they learned early, too early, that love was conditional, that acceptance came with requirements, that belonging demanded the surrender of self. Children are remarkable observers. They see patterns even when adults think they're hiding them, and the sensitive child sees everything. So they learned. They learned to read the room. They learned what pleased and what disappointed. They learned to fold themselves into the shape that kept them safe, that kept them close to the warmth of others, even if that warmth never quite reached the parts of them they kept hidden. But now, as an adult, standing at this crossroads between the old way and something new, the sensitive soul faces a question that has no easy answer. If they stop people-pleasing, if they stop performing, if they stop managing and accommodating and adjusting, who will they be? What will remain when they strip away all the strategies, all the adaptations, all the carefully constructed ways of being that have defined them for so long? This is the existential terror at the heart of the transformation. It's not just about learning to say no or setting boundaries or speaking your truth, though those things are part of it. It's about facing the void, the not knowing, the possibility that underneath all the performing, all the giving, all the sensing and responding and adjusting, there might be nobody there at all. Heidegger understood this terror. He called it anxiety, but not anxiety about any particular thing. Rather, anxiety in the face of existence itself. The dizzying recognition that you are responsible for your own being, that no one can tell you who you are or who you should be, that you must somehow create yourself from the raw material of your existence without any guarantee that what you create will be acceptable, lovable, or even coherent. The people-pleasing sensitive soul has spent their whole life running from this anxiety, but now they're turning toward it. And the first steps feel like walking off the edge of the world. Because once you start, once you set that first boundary, speak that first truth, disappoint that first person, something irreversible happens. You can't pretend anymore that you don't know. You can't go back to the comfortable unconsciousness of automatic accommodation. You've seen behind the curtain of your own behavior, and you can't unsee it. Every subsequent interaction becomes loaded with choice. Do I say what they want to hear or what I actually think? Do I accommodate this request or honor my own limits? Do I smooth this over or let the discomfort exist? Each choice feels monumental because each choice is creating the person you're becoming. And the exhaustion of this is real. It would be so much easier to just fall back into the old patterns, to let the automatic responses take over, to stop thinking so much about every interaction and just be the easy, accommodating, low-maintenance person everyone expects. But there's a voice now, quiet but insistent, that won't let them go back. A voice that asks, at what cost? At what cost to your soul, to your integrity, to your one wild and precious life? This voice isn't cruel. It doesn't berate them for the years of people-pleasing. It simply refuses to be silent anymore. It's the voice of their own being, finally demanding to be heard. And once you've heard it, really heard it, you can't ignore it without doing violence to yourself. The transformation begins to accelerate, not because they're trying to change quickly, but because truth has a momentum of its own. Once you start living from a more authentic place, even in small ways, the contrast with the old way becomes unbearable. The cost of pretending becomes too high. The gap between who you are and who you're presenting becomes too wide to maintain. Relationships begin to shift, sometimes in ways that are surprising. The friend who always called you with their problems suddenly gets uncomfortable when you share yours. The family member who praised you for being so easygoing now accuses you of being difficult. The partner who loved how you never made demands now doesn't know what to do when you express needs. These shifts reveal something the sensitive soul had always known but never wanted to face. Many of their relationships were built on their willingness to be smaller, to take up less space, to need less, to demand nothing. And when they stop offering this, when they stop playing this role, the relationship has no foundation to stand on. This is devastating to discover, but it's also clarifying, because it shows them with brutal honesty where they actually stand. It shows them who can meet them in their fullness and who can only relate to them when they're diminished. It shows them which connections were real and which were transactions they didn't know they were making. There's a particular kind of loneliness in this phase of transformation. Because the old relationships are ending or radically changing, but the new ones haven't fully formed yet. The sensitive soul finds themselves in a kind of liminal space between the person they were and the person they're becoming, between the old ways of relating and the new, between the familiar discomfort of self-abandonment and the unfamiliar discomfort of self-honoring. In this liminal space, everything feels uncertain. Am I doing this right? Am I being selfish? Have I overcorrected? Am I pushing people away unnecessarily? These questions swirl constantly because there's no map for this territory, no instruction manual for how to unlearn years of conditioning and create a new way of being. But something interesting begins to happen in this uncertainty. The sensitive soul starts to develop a different relationship with themselves. Instead of constantly looking outward for validation, for confirmation that they're okay, that they're doing it right, that they're enough, they start to look inward. Not in a narcissistic way, but in a way that honors their own experience as valid, as real, as worthy of attention. They start to notice things. The tightness in their chest when they're about to say yes to something they want to say no to. The lightness that comes when they speak a difficult truth. The quiet satisfaction of going to bed, knowing they didn't betray themselves today. The subtle but unmistakable difference between the exhaustion that comes from self-abandonment and the tiredness that comes from honest living. These small noticings become guideposts. They don't answer all the questions, they don't make the path clear, but they provide a way of navigating that doesn't depend on others' reactions or approval. They provide an internal compass that can be trusted when external validation is nowhere to be found. Heidegger wrote about authenticity, about the possibility of living in a way that is genuinely your own, rather than dictated by the anonymous they. But he was clear that this authenticity is not something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's something you must choose again and again, moment by moment, in the face of constant pressure to conform, to accommodate, to disappear into the crowd. For the sensitive soul who is learning to stop people-pleasing, every day becomes a practice in this kind of authenticity. Every boundary they set is a small act of reclaiming themselves from the collective. Every time they speak their truth, even when their voice shakes, even when they can feel the room's energy shift uncomfortably, they are choosing their own existence over the comfortable fiction they used to maintain. And slowly something remarkable begins to happen. The people who loved them conditionally, who loved the accommodating version, the easy version, the version that never made demands or caused discomfort, these people begin to fall away. And this falling away is its own kind of grief. Because the sensitive soul had relationships with these people, histories, memories, connections that felt real, even if they were built on a false foundation. But as some people fall away, others emerge. Or rather, they were always there, but now they can finally be seen. These are the people who don't need you to shrink, who don't need you to manage their emotions or walk on eggshells around their fragility. These are the people who can meet you in your fullness, in your truth, in your beautiful, difficult, unedited humanity. And the sensitive soul discovers something they never knew before. That true connection doesn't require self-abandonment, that you can be deeply attuned to another person without losing yourself in them. That intimacy is not the same thing as fusion. That love does not demand the erasure of one person for the comfort of another. This is the paradox at the heart of the sensitive soul's journey. They had to learn to feel others in order to survive. But they have to learn to feel themselves in order to truly live. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this transformation, because even as new connections form, even as more authentic relationships emerge, the sensitive soul is now occupying a space they've never inhabited before. They're learning to be with themselves, to tolerate their own company, to sit with their own desires and fears and contradictions without immediately trying to fix them or hide them or make them more palatable. They're learning what Heidegger called thrownness, the recognition that we are each thrown into a particular existence, a particular set of circumstances, a particular way of being that is uniquely ours. And we can spend our whole lives running from this thrownness, trying to be anything other than what we are, or we can turn toward it. We can face it. We can inhabit it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't match what we think we should be. For the people-pleasing sensitive soul, this thrownness includes their sensitivity itself. They cannot stop feeling deeply. They cannot stop perceiving the undercurrents of human interaction. They cannot stop being moved by beauty and devastated by cruelty. This is not something to overcome or transcend. It's the ground of their being. But what they can do is stop treating their sensitivity as a tool for everyone else's benefit. They can stop believing that their awareness obligates them to fix, to smooth over, to make everything okay for everyone around them. They can allow their sensitivity to be what it actually is, a way of experiencing the world, not a duty to manage it. As this transformation deepens, the sensitive soul notices something else shifting. Their relationship with time itself begins to change. When you're constantly people-pleasing, you're always living in anticipation. You're scanning the future for potential disappointments, potential conflicts, potential moments where someone might need something from you. You're never fully here because you're always preparing for what's next, always calculating how to navigate the next interaction, the next demand, the next opportunity to prove your worth by meeting someone else's need. But when you stop people-pleasing, when you stop organizing your entire existence around others, you suddenly have access to the present moment in a way you never did before. Time slows down, or perhaps it's not that time slows down, but that you finally catch up to it. You're no longer running ahead of yourself, no longer living in the gap between what is and what others need you to make it. You're here, now, in your own life. This presence is both exhilarating and terrifying, because when you're fully present, you also have to feel everything you've been running from. The grief of all those years of self-abandonment, the anger at the people who took and took and took without ever asking what you needed, the sadness of realizing how many of your relationships were built on a transaction you didn't even know you were making, your authenticity in exchange for their approval. But you also get to feel the other things. The sun on your skin, the taste of food when you're not eating on autopilot, the sound of your own laughter when it's genuine, not performed, the quiet satisfaction of doing something simply because you want to, not because someone else expects it. You get to feel your own life. There's a story Heidegger tells, not in words, but in the architecture of his philosophy, about the difference between existing and truly living. Most of us exist. We go through the motions. We follow the script. We do what one does. We build the kind of life that makes sense to others, that fits into recognizable categories, that doesn't ask too many questions or cause too much disruption. But there are moments, rare and precious moments, when we wake up to the fact that we're alive, that we have this one existence, this one opportunity to be here, now, in whatever form we happen to take. And in those moments, we have a choice. We can go back to sleep, back to the comfortable numbness of living as one lives. Or we can stay awake, even though staying awake means feeling everything, including the things we'd rather not feel. The sensitive soul who stops people-pleasing is making the choice to stay awake. Not because they're brave, not because they're strong, but because they've finally realized that the alternative, continuing to live as a ghost in their own life, is no longer bearable. And here's what nobody tells you about making this choice. It doesn't get easier. You don't suddenly become someone who doesn't care what others think. You don't stop feeling the discomfort when you disappoint someone, or the guilt when you set a boundary. The sensitivity doesn't go away. But what changes is your relationship to all of it. You learn to feel the guilt without letting it dictate your choices. You notice the discomfort without immediately trying to fix it. You sense the disappointment in someone else without making it your responsibility to absorb or prevent. You learn to carry your sensitivity as something that belongs to you, rather than something you owe to everyone else. This is mastery. Not the mastery of control or suppression, but the mastery of presence. The ability to be with what is, including the difficult things, including the uncomfortable things, without immediately needing to change them, or run from them, or sacrifice yourself to make them better. As the months and years pass, the sensitive soul who has stopped people-pleasing begins to notice a strange phenomenon. The people in their life start to relax. Not all of them, not the ones who needed the old version, the accommodating version, but the ones who remain, the ones who can meet them in their authenticity. These people begin to show up differently. Because when you stop managing everyone else's emotions, you give them the opportunity to manage their own. When you stop smoothing over every conflict, you allow people to develop their own resilience. When you stop being everything to everyone, you create space for others to step into their own power. This is the gift the sensitive soul never knew they were withholding by people-pleasing. By trying to make everything okay for everyone, they were actually preventing people from learning how to be okay on their own. By absorbing everyone's discomfort, they were denying others the opportunity to develop their own capacity to sit with difficulty. The relationships that survive this transformation become deeper, more real, more alive, because they're no longer based on a one-sided transaction. They're based on mutual presence, on the possibility of two people showing up as they actually are, not as they think they should be. And the sensitive soul discovers that this kind of connection, this honest, unglamorous, sometimes messy connection, is infinitely more nourishing than the smooth, easy, carefully managed relationships they used to have. There are still moments of doubt, moments when the old patterns resurface, when the urge to accommodate, to smooth over, to make everything okay for everyone, rises up like an old habit. And in these moments, the sensitive soul has to choose again, to remember why they started this journey, to remember what it felt like to be a stranger to themselves. They have to remember that living authentically is not a destination but a practice, that every day, every interaction, every moment of discomfort is an opportunity to choose themselves without abandoning their sensitivity, to honor both their awareness of others and their responsibility to their own truth. Heidegger called this way of being Dasein, literally being there, the particular kind of existence that is uniquely human. We are always already there in the world, thrown into circumstances we didn't choose, navigating relationships and expectations and possibilities. But we have the capacity to be consciously there, to take ownership of our being there, rather than simply drifting through it according to what one does. For the sensitive soul who has stopped people-pleasing, this conscious being there becomes their daily practice. They're not trying to be someone else. They're not trying to transcend their sensitivity or become less affected by the world. They're simply learning to be there in their own life on their own terms, with all their complexity and contradiction intact. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something even deeper shifts. The question changes. It's no longer what do others need from me, or even what do I need for myself. It becomes something more fundamental, more essential. It becomes, what does it mean to be alive here now as this particular person? This question has no final answer. It's a question you live into, a question that reveals itself differently in each moment, in each encounter, in each choice. But it's a real question, an honest question, a question that belongs to them rather than to the anonymous they. When a sensitive soul stops people-pleasing, they don't become less sensitive. They don't become hard or closed off or indifferent. If anything, they become more sensitive, more attuned, more aware, because now they're including themselves in the circle of beings worthy of attention and care. They learn to feel their own exhaustion before they collapse. They learn to notice their own resentment before it hardens into bitterness. They learn to honor their own needs before they become desperate and demanding. And in doing so, they become more capable of genuine connection, not less. Because they're no longer a bottomless well that others can draw from without ever filling. They're no longer a mirror that only reflects back what others want to see. They're a person. Complex, contradictory, sometimes difficult, always changing, but undeniably, authentically there. The world doesn't always know what to do with this. Our culture loves people-pleasers. It loves the ones who smooth things over, who never make waves, who accommodate and adjust and make everything easier for everyone else. It calls them nice, easygoing, low maintenance. It rewards their self-erasure with approval, with praise, with the illusion of being loved. But that love is conditional. It lasts only as long as you keep performing, as long as you keep making yourself smaller, as long as you keep putting everyone else first. The love that emerges when you stop people-pleasing is different. It's not conditional on your performance. It's not dependent on your constant accommodation. It's based on the possibility of being seen, truly seen, in all your messy, complicated humanity. And being loved anyway. Not because you've made it easy, but because you've made it real. This is the freedom that awaits the sensitive soul on the other side of people-pleasing. Not freedom from feeling, not freedom from caring, but freedom to be themselves while still remaining in relationship. Freedom to say no without it meaning they don't love you. Freedom to have needs without being needy. Freedom to disappoint someone without it defining their worth. And yes, some people will be disappointed. Some will be angry. Some will say you've changed, and they'll mean it as an accusation. They'll miss the old version, the version that made their lives easier. They'll want that person back. But you can't go back. Once you've tasted what it's like to live in your own skin, to inhabit your own existence, to be present to your own life, you can't unfeel it. You can't unknow what you now know. You can only move forward, one authentic moment at a time. There's a kind of grief in this that never fully goes away. A grief for the person you might have been if you'd learned this sooner. A grief for the years spent living for everyone but yourself. A grief for the relationships that couldn't survive your transformation. But there's also a kind of joy that emerges, quiet and steady and surprisingly durable. The joy of alignment, of coherence, of no longer being split between who you are and who you present to the world. The joy of small, ordinary moments lived honestly. A conversation where you say what you actually think, an invitation declined without guilt, a desire expressed without apology. These moments don't make good stories. They don't have the drama of the old life, the constant crisis management, the exhausting dance of trying to keep everyone happy. But they have something better. They have the ring of truth. They have the weight of authenticity. They have the quiet dignity of a life that belongs to the person living it. In the end, when a sensitive soul stops people-pleasing, they don't become someone new. They become more fully themselves. The sensitivity remains, the awareness remains, the capacity for deep feeling remains, but it's no longer a tool for everyone else's comfort. It's no longer a way of earning love or avoiding conflict or proving their worth. It's simply the way they move through the world, the particular texture of their existence, the unique flavor of their being here. And that, it turns out, is enough. More than enough, it's everything. The sun rises whether you've pleased everyone or not. The seasons change. The world continues to turn. And somewhere in the midst of it all, a sensitive soul is learning to walk through their own life without apologizing for the space they take up, without shrinking to make room for others, without erasing themselves in the name of keeping the peace. They're learning that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of truth, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to simply, courageously, irreversibly, be who you actually are. Even when it's difficult, even when it disappoints, even when it changes everything. Especially then.